So this lecture is divided into kind of three parts. The first one is the problem, as I talk about what is the problem of piracy. Next we talk about the solutions to piracy, and after that the ethical and legal problems of those solutions. Okay? So here we have a map of the problem. From 2006 to 2013, this is all the recorded attacks on private shipping companies going around the world. So we can see off the coast of South America, we have small numbers of attacks. We can see the Gulf of Guinea, a small concentrated amount of attacks, mostly off the coast of Nigeria. This has seen the largest rise in piracy attacks over the past couple of years. The Straits of Malacca, we can see here, they've had a consistent problem of piracy over the past sort of 20 years, but it's been pretty stable. It hasn't gone significantly up or down. Then we have here Somalia. We can see here there are so many attacks in this area here that it forms a solid red line. This is the largest number of attacks. We can see how it's progressed over time. 2007, it was just very close off the coast of Somalia. 2008, it starts to move out, but then we have significant increases in the range of pirate attacks. 2009, 10, 11. So 10 years ago, if you were the subject of a pirate attack, it's because you were going into Somalia. Now, it's more these areas, almost anywhere in the Indian Ocean. So to go back to the map, we can see it's all this area here. So anyone taking goods from China to Europe via the Suez Canal is likely to enter the high-risk area unless they go around the Cape of Good Hope, which is a much longer route. And most of the oil that goes from the GCC states, the Gulf Cooperation Council region, that will mostly go through this region as well. Okay? So it's a huge amount of valuable goods on civilian ships are going through this area. This area has increased through the use of motherships. Originally, pirates were using very small ships, maybe 2, 3, 4 meters long, and they could only go a certain distance out from coast. They started hooking these up to much larger fishing vessels and so could extend way out into this area. The Prime Minister made a statement in 2011 saying how ridiculous it was that the global economy was being held hostage by a bunch of pirates. He said we needed to come together with much more vigour. And again, just to show why it's Somali piracy and not Gulf of Guinea piracy or Straits of Malacca piracy that we're looking at, we can see the graph here. The blue line here is the attacks just off the coast of Somalia. And everywhere else was obviously a lot lower. So 2009, 10, 11, it peaks up quite dramatically. And with hijacking, 90-odd% of hijackings were happening in Somalia. So it is significantly larger than anywhere else in the world. Do you have any questions at this point? Yeah?
What happened in 2011?
Essentially, the pirate attacks went up, and it's very difficult to attach that.
Because it goes down.
Here they start to go down, yeah. So here we start to have countermeasures taken.
Right, okay.
So this is when people start to react. 2009, 10, it started to go up, and 11 we start to have the massive counter. So again, this is the high-risk area. Just to set it out, this is what maritime companies use. This is widely defined, so anywhere in pink, which is most of the map. This will affect insurance, this will affect pay for crews, this will affect a great deal of what happens in the maritime industry. So as I say, the solutions, why it went down in 2011. There's an expression that where you stand depends on where you sit. You've heard this before. A similar one that if a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So if you come from a particular point of view, for example, if you work in the security industry, then you see this as a security problem. So pirates are therefore a threat, because that's how security understands these things. Therefore, the pirates are just the enemy. The natural tool for an enemy is a military force, and the natural thing for the military force to do is to kill. So if you're a security person, you tend to follow through this logic. If you're a lawyer, then you might think a little bit differently. If you're a lawyer, you'll say, well, piracy is a crime. It breaches UNCLOS 101, which is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Article 101, which outlaws piracy in the high seas. It outlaws the Armed Robbery at Sea conventions. So if it's just a crime, then pirates are not a threat as such, they're just criminals. So if they're criminals, then you need to look at law enforcement agencies and so on. And then if it's law enforcement agencies, you want to look at deterrence and punishment. You want to catch the criminal, put him in prison. If you're an economist, again, you see this differently. You'd say, well, the understanding of this problem is that it costs a lot of money. We have a global economic system, and this represents the difficulty of that global economic system. How big that difficulty is pretty contended. So Geopolity is a research organisation that said it cost the global economy $4.9 billion in 2010 alone. However, the World Bank said it would cost closer to $24 billion in 2010 alone. It's how you classify which costs matter. But whichever way, it is billions of dollars, so therefore there needs to be an economic response to it. Pirates are just an economic entity affecting other economic entities in a negative way. So the way to deal with that is naturally to look at business and to say that businesses should start reacting. I will say that this was based on School of Management research, therefore this is pretty well the angle that I will take. We're looking at major maritime companies trying to get goods from A to B in the cheapest way possible and the safest way possible. And pirates just represent the kind of cost. Okay? But development and humanitarian, they're quite linked, they're quite similar. So pirates are just symptoms of a root cause. So the root cause of piracy could be the inequalities in the global system. It could be that the majority, about 46% of people in Yemen are chronically undernourished. So they don't regularly get the amount of food and water they should. So therefore this drives them into some kind of way of breaking it out. In Somalia, it's the majority of Somalia's economy is an agricultural economy. So if there isn't the agriculture you need, if you get a famine, if you get drought, then this is a push. It pushes people into anything else that they can do to get money. Therefore, pirates are in a sense a victim. They come from a bad environment and they're trying to get out. So therefore it's development agencies and some kind of rehabilitation, finding alternative livelihoods for them. Equally with the humanitarian, you'd say it's a sudden crisis, and the way that you prevent this is by sort of the World Food Programme going in and delivering food when there's a famine. So there's not quite the pressure to push people out to do this. So again, you have these series of 5 perspectives. Again, are there any questions on these 5 that we have so far? Seeing kind of blank nose. Okay. Then I'll say that there is a 6th perspective. The 6th perspective is one that I very much like. It's the spaceman or spacewoman perspective. The European Space Agency have entirely their own perspective, which is to look at weather. The ESA track weather patterns and map them on to pirate attacks. So this red line here is the average wind speed over the course of a year in the Gulf of Aden. And you can see the black dots here represent pirate attacks. So what you can see is that when you have a spike in wind speed, this is Kharif, when you get the edge of the monsoon coming into this area, you get no pirate attacks. When it goes down, you suddenly get pirate attacks again. If you blow this up big and you start to analyse it, you'll see that the most likely time for a pirate attack is when you've had high winds and suddenly it's gone down. You've had people waiting to go out, waiting to do something, they've not been able to do so, the wind's gone down and suddenly they can go out. This is a more detailed version. It's like northern pirates going out there and doing their stuff. Again, this is wind speed here and wave height. So are you aware of sea states? One man. So sea states are that you look at the sea, the different heights of the waves, the different wind speed are classified scientifically from 1 to about 9 that I've been out in there, it goes up to 10, 11. So pirate attacks have only happened, to our recorded knowledge, in sea states 4 or above. So when it's relatively low winds and relatively low waves. That's because they're on relatively small ships. If it's too windy, they can't go out. Too big waves, they can't go out. However, since we don't control the weather, that cannot be a deterrent. But it does show us when it's likely to happen and when you should start looking out for pirates. Again, if you've had bad conditions for pirates, then you get good conditions, that's the time that they're likely to attack. Okay? Obviously, piracy affects a very major industry, and we have the International Maritime Organization producing BMPs. These are best management practices. We've had 1, 2, 3, and now this is 4. You can see the collection of logos underneath, and these represent almost all the major maritime organisations. They have all been consulted and have endorsed this document. So this document is essentially the manual on how to deal with pirates in this region. And there's a series of do not be's. The first of them is do not be alone. If you go into the high-risk area, which is clearly delineated, then you can report to the UK Maritime Trade Office, which is based in Dubai, or you can report to MSHOA, which I think is the way to say this, which is the European Union Task Force headquarters, and you report that you're going in there, what time you expect to go out, and what is your general passage plan. So at least they know you're there. If something happens, they're not suddenly surprised, who are you? You don't have to do this, but this is considered the best practice. Do not be detected. The pirates shouldn't be able to spot you easily. Most of these very large ships would be lit up like a Christmas tree at night. They'll be very, very bright in normal conditions. But going through these conditions, they would be recommended to switch off most of their lights, except the essential navigation lights. Essentially, just so they can't be seen from too far away, so they don't look an inviting target. This is mainly at night. Do not be surprised by pirates. Constantly look out for them. Expect them to appear at any moment. Bear in mind that visibility can be very, very low in this part of the world. It's very hot. You get sea haze. You can disguise them on these very small ships. They don't always show up on radar, so keep a lookout at all times. Do not be vulnerable, so your ship needs to be pirate-proofed. I'll talk a bit later about how you can pirate-proof your ship. Do not be boarded. Generally, when pirates successfully board a ship, they take it. So this is an essential stage, but if you are boarded, do not be controlled. You can wall off certain parts of your ship. Try not to let them have complete control of the engine room, the bridge, and crew quarters, essential areas of the ship. So these are the stages according to the best management practice for. Again, I invite questions at this time. My invitation is refused. So again, when I was studying this, I was looking from an accountancy point of view. I was saying pirates represent a loss for independent shipping companies. Shipping companies must therefore spend money on some kind of deterrent, some kind of solution. The solutions that I found that they were doing, first of all, passive deterrent equipment. So it's stuff you don't shoot, stuff you don't fire. So for example, barbed wire is just there, it's passive. Electrified wire is there, it's passive. Notices saying, warning, we have electric wires, it's passive. So this is passive deterrent equipment. The next thing is insurance. Again, piracy represents a loss of money for independent shipping companies, so you take out increased insurance. There are extra fuel costs. Pirates have not successfully attacked a ship going at 18 knots or above. But ships are designed to go at certain speeds. They'll go along quite happily at 10, 9, and the slower they go, the cheaper it is. The faster you go, the more expensive it is. Okay? Extra pay costs. In a high-risk area, if you're employing crew to go into a high-risk area, you expect to pay them more. And PMSCs. There's a kind of coconut waiting for anyone who knows what this is. No, coconuts, private maritime security companies or private militarised security companies, men with guns on ships, occasionally women with guns on ships. So again, just to go through each of those in detail, we have passive deterrent equipment, Kevlar and helmets for people, especially on bridge or on lookouts. These are recommended to be in non-military colours to indicate that they are not military personnel. Sandbags, especially around vulnerable parts of the ship, electric fencing, anti-RPG sheeting, the stuff that goes on the windows to stop them shattering if something gets hit. Controlling all access routes, so with pirate gates, again this is how you wall off and padlock the vulnerable parts of the ships, and CCTVs all around the ship so you can see the pirates when they're coming. Has anyone heard of any other passive deterrent equipment or anything else? This is not your area. Yeah?
Wasn't there Britney Spears songs?
Sorry?
Wasn't there Britney Spears songs?
Playing them very, very loudly to scare the pirates away?
Something like that. I just came from a lecture where we talked about pirates and they suggested Britney Spears songs worked.
This is a new and novel one. You can use psychological warfare. Tell you what, this could be the auditory devices. There are some police forces that have been experimenting with using, devices that use high frequency emitters which damages people's eardrums. Now I know the German police looked into this and they found they could not use this on crowds because it can cause permanent damage. However, putting this on a ship in international waters is a different matter. So they might be using these devices, and again, whether it's Britney Spears song or something else, it is ear-splitting noises anyway. Yes.
Water cannons are considered passive or aggressive?
I would say they can fall between the two, but certainly they're a common deterrent equipment. And here's something that can change the equation. Obviously you have water hoses on all ships because of the risk of fire, but you can also heat that water. So something that's said to be incredibly effective is using hot water, including steam. So yeah, if you shoot steam out of your ship, it can scare people off. I think that would be a fairly aggressive deterrent myself. Insurance. You'll know that ship insurance is the oldest form of insurance in the world, which is surely the best takeaway fact ever. This is a picture of Lloyd's of London, who are the specialist, and this is a pretty complex industry because each individual shipping company will have its own policies, sometimes for individual ships, groups of ships, whatever. So you have your regular complex shipping insurance, you'll have your war risk insurance, so Lloyd's of London have a war committee that meet to decide the most dangerous areas of the world and just how dangerous they are for insurance purposes. Then you'll have kidnap and ransom insurance for the crews. Okay? And the extra fuel costs, again, I've already said, 18 knots and above, generally speaking, there have been no attacks. Again, no recorded attacks.
Do big commercial ships actually go above 18 knots in order to save the money? Or would they rather resort to passive deterrence in terms of money?
Generally, we've seen a combination of all of those. Over time, there has been an evolution of the costs. So the original reaction when these ships were not outfitted with much was to put a huge amount of money into extra fuel to go a lot faster. Over time, they started to diversify the different costs. So this is actually a picture of the Maersk Triple E vessel. So this is actually designed to go at lower speeds in order to save CO2 emissions. But it is supposed to go at about 80 knots above. You're a new person. Should be asking you all the questions as we go through now. Extra pay costs. So again, if you go into the high risk area, which is clearly delineated on this chart and on here, then you expect as a member of the crew to be paid more. You'd be paid hazard pay, double pay, additional pay, and if you are captured, then you'd be given captivity pay. So whilst you are incarcerated, this is often people from very poor parts of the world. We have a lot of Filipino sailors, for example. If they are captured, then they're hired for one particular transit, but whilst they are captured, they continue to be paid. So this is something that comes under the ship's insurance generally.
I know this is probably very detailed, but in terms of percent of the normal pay, how much would a hazard pay going through this zone be?
Right up to double and perhaps beyond, but this can be tracked through the International Bargaining Forum, so the answer is definitely out there for you to find. Okay. Oceans Beyond Piracy consult very closely with those, and Oceans Beyond Piracy is all open source with the documents they publish, so you can find that information quite happily. So already we're getting to the complexity of the solutions. Have you ever heard of Paul Rogers? Some of the peace studies people have. So I interviewed him about piracy, and he was saying the big issue is whether you're seeing the way forward is to maintain the status quo or not. The current status quo is that we consistently send ships through there and then just try and defend them. Are there any other solutions? Big pause. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah. This is very general agreed. So this is the UN Security Council, as this is Bradford MUN. The ongoing instability in Somalia is one of the underlying causes of piracy. So the Somali government has ceased to exist since about 1990 odd. So it ceased to be a recognised government. So for more than 20 odd years, there has been no central government that's recognised by any other government. Somalia is a very unstable place. It is a place which has had famines, civil war, it's been divided into its different regions, so there is a limited opportunity for anyone who lives there. And again, Paul Rogers was saying that these people have limited opportunity. If they see an opportunity, then they would generally tend to take it. Okay? However, I was chatting to a man named David Hammond, who's the founder of Human Rights at Sea, and has been involved in legal projects supporting the Somali system of government. He was arguing that what we cheer for David Hammond. What we consider in a Western view as an ungoverned state does not necessarily mean it's ungoverned. We simply do not recognise any central authority. But he was going out in 4x4s with armed security teams to protect him, to try and support the lawyers and judges out there. Something like 70% of the judiciary no longer work either through assassinations or fear of assassinations. But he was going out there to meet with the sort of tribal elders. There was a problem, the tribes were negotiated between themselves. And although there's no kind of police involved, although there's no court, although there's not something that we would normally recognise as, a European-style system of governance, there is problem solving. There is a form of justice. It's not written and it's not widely recognised, but it is out there. It's not wild space. It's not the Wild West. So he was saying it's not actually ungoverned, but it's governed in a way that perhaps is different from what we conventionally understand. So it's a matter of working with those systems and trying to improve the situation. PMSCs. You were asking whether fuel costs is it. This comes from Mr. Madsen, who is one of the lead researchers for Motions Beyond Piracy. He's been doing this for about 4 years. And he's argued that the industry doesn't want to highlight the success of PMSCs. So you saw the drop-off earlier when it was 2010-11, the tax had been going up and then suddenly going down. Once you have these teams on board, it does kind of prevent it. But they don't want to emphasise this. Why do you think shipping companies do not want to be so open about this?
Killing people.
Yeah, yes, okay, killing people, yes. I mean, there's obviously that aspect to it.
Legal matter?
Sorry?
Legal matter? No,
There's definitely
not
legal
only
matter.
trading what you trade, but you also have to fill in the weapons that these soldiers are bringing in.
Absolutely.
And then you're responsible for what they do with those weapons, either choose to trade them or do something with them rather illegal.
I'll talk about the weapons now as you mentioned it, and it gets onto one of my favourite facts about piracy. How do you arm people and how do you, again, legally deal with these weapons? Once you put them on board a ship, if they go into British waters, it's under British law, French waters under French laws, and so on and so on and so on. If you're calling in at ship ports unexpectedly, then again you might have to deal with a lot of paperwork and so on. There are a couple of ways of dealing with this. There are kind of ad hoc ways of dealing with it. So, for example, you might disassemble the weapons, dump the ammunition overboard, and then you've got spare parts, technically. But this can get a bit much. Or you can use something called a floating armoury. Does anyone know what a floating armoury is? Floating armouries, you go from British waters, for example, into international waters. In international waters, there is a ship which sells you weapons in international waters. Then you go through the high-risk area, still in international waters, you sell it to another ship. And then you go into another port, say India, and you have no weapons on board in Indian waters, no weapons on board in British waters. So these ships are called floating armouries that buy and sell weapons in international waters. Yeah.
Is this a legal trade?
This is not, strictly speaking, an illegal trade because you're in international waters and the laws are a bit hazy. Obviously, you must follow the laws of your flag state. Every ship is registered under a particular flag. London is the most common flag state, but not for floating armouries. The most common state for floating armouries, and I'll give a chocolate bar. Genuinely go out and buy a chocolate bar for anyone who can guess.
Somalia.
Not Somalia, that's your first guess, I'm going to give you 5.
China.
Not China.
America.
Not America.
No.
Cuba.
Not Cuba, you've got one more guess.
Oh God, something like Sierra Leone.
Not Sierra Leone. Not even close. It is Mongolia.
What is
Mongolia is
It's a
the number one flag state for floating armouries.
It's a landlocked.
It is a landlocked country. According to a legal lawyer who looked into this, their maritime law is almost 2 A4 pages and not closely written. However, there is now 2 licensed floating armouries under UK law, under UK trade licences. As to why this has been done, the best theory I've heard is that the British government would rather it was done kind of under our auspices than under, effectively, no government, no oversight. Some oversight is better than no oversight. Yeah, ongoing. Again, going back to kind of the economic argument, because that was the structure of the research, why they don't want to emphasise that private military security contracts have been so important goes to this quote. On land, you expect a country to provide basic security services. So if you own a shop and you get robbed, then you don't expect the government to say, get security. You expect the police because you pay corporate taxation and so on. If you're a private individual, if people are breaking into your house, you don't expect to be told, buy knuckle dusters, get boxing lessons. You expect the police to get involved. These shipping companies pay huge amounts of tax, but suddenly they feel they're not getting the protection they need. So they're paying the same tax as everybody else, but they're not getting the same services. So they would like to pressure countries into providing these services. There are 3 task forces out there. So we have Task Force 151, we have Operation Ocean Shield, which is for the aid going to Somalia. So we do have ships out there. However, even when you have, I think, more than 20 countries contributing to Task Force 151, even when you have China getting involved in security in this part of the world, which is unusual, they're breaking out of their usual area of interest, even when you have all this, we're talking about 1 million square miles of sea. And the window for preventing an attack is thought to be about 45 minutes. And helicopters can only stay in the air so long. So it's been described as policing the whole of Yorkshire with 1 police car. Just the sheer size of it with the number of ships we have. We have moved to a model of less and less ships within all navies, which are more and more capable, but that means you can't spread them out. You had a question.
Yeah, these 3 task forces, they are multilateral agreements between countries separate from the UN, or are they part of a UN framework?
They are operating under UN mandates, I believe. So the UN will often give credence to local organisations. We'll talk about the EU and NATO.
Okay.
And I think the UN is Operation Ocean Shield. I couldn't swear to it. But yeah, so we have a certain amount of government involvement. And getting to this dilemma, again, the argument between, someone mentioned the legal problems of having men with guns on ships and women with guns on ships, and the cost problem. I asked David Hammond, will firms cut costs if it means cutting quality in terms of the mercenaries they have on ships? And he was saying, I'm not saying all will, but a lot will. So we might see lower grades of mercenaries on board ships.
So,
yeah.
What do you mean by lower grade of mercenaries?
Then I should get straight to that slide. This is what I mean. Getting to the final slide. A lot of mercenary companies will try and argue that they are the best. But 5 years ago, 6 years ago, mercenaries for ships didn't really exist. It wasn't a market. Suddenly it exploded into being a huge, huge, huge industry. And so they're competing. It's like the phases of any new industry, that you have the initial bit where there aren't any companies, then a few companies that do very, very well, lots of companies come in, and then they start to compete for that limited space, some start to drop out. We are now in the shakeout phase, I would suggest, as mercenary companies have started to go bust. They have started to be bought out by other companies. So this is where we start to get differentiation. So for the gold standard, the nationality of their teams is former NATO personnel. So you've got ex-UK Marines, US Marines, and so on, and other NATO partners. It's the standard soldier's problem. I can fire a mortar, I can fire a rifle, I've now left the army, what do I do? And so for this is considered a pretty good career move. The team size, a 4-person team for a pretty large ship, and you can have 2 on watch, 2 off watch, deal with any potential situation. Rules for the use of force. So under what scenario are you going to open fire? So if they're trained in an industry-recognised RUF, and there are a couple out there, so we had the BMP one earlier, and there's the 100 series rules, which is plain English. It's being checked against sort of international maritime law and against UNCLOS and various others. So if you're trained in that rules for the use of force, if there is an incident, if something happens, you can always return to it and say, we followed this, if you're trained to do it. Firearms, a clear policy on your firearms, and again, are you getting them from floating armories, are they registered, and so on, and reporting. A lot of what happens in international waters is voluntary reporting. If there's an incident, you can report it. You don't have to, and a lot of companies will choose not to. There are a variety of reasons why you choose not to. One of them is simply time. If you're a shipping company, time is money. So if you report an incident, then it might be that the local authorities will want to talk to you, investigate your ship next time you go into port. You go into port, and that could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, or it could be a matter of days that you hadn't planned before. So it reduces You did have a question.
Yeah, you had that graph at the beginning where, with all the reported.
Yes.
I assume that's only the reported
Yes.
incidents. So, how big would you say is the figure of unreported compared to the?
The simple answer is nobody knows for sure. Certainly with suspicious approaches. Previously, again, 5 years ago, that was none. There were no suspicious approaches. Nobody ever saw a ship that they thought might be a pirate. Now we see significant numbers where they think it might be because it's not operating as a ship in that area normally does. People are starting to come forward and report it a lot more. But it's the problem you have with almost any crime. How much is reported and how much isn't. These represent what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. You're right. So yeah, the reporting is a significant issue. So this is the gold standard behaviour, yeah.
We're going to the report. So can a company that hires, let's say, bronze level mercenaries, they destroy the little boats and the pirates are coming, they're completely annihilated and they don't report it, then no one knows about it?
Yeah, so it has happened, and we know this because there's someone on board with a video camera, and it later came out. There have been incidents, but precisely where they've happened, what ship it was, and so on is actually very difficult to trace. But yeah, again, we do not know what we do not know, but it can happen. So the silver we started to see more and more of, I'm told. So we would see somebody which is NATO-led, but then they'll have another team working underneath them who are non-NATO. So again, Eastern European is one, and then we might have South African, Israeli, and other nations coming in. Belarusian was mentioned. But again, this would be NATO-led, and we might have 2 or 3 people teams have come in as more and more non-NATO personnel, and again, RUF, it depends. Just going to back up on the slides a bit. This one. Again, it's a long quote, and I apologise for so much writing on one slide. But again, this was a lawyer mentioning to me that with 97 international multi-million-dollar litigation cases in the world, it will only be a short period of time before we get them, for instance, at sea. So it could be that you are a member of a crew on a ship that has been attacked and you feel there wasn't the necessary protection for you. For example, it could be that you were kidnapped, or you feel, again, that the company did not treat you well. Can you again think of any of these multi-million-dollar litigation companies or any damage to a reputation from something that happened in the third world? I'm not sure if I'm phrasing that question right. How about this?
British Petroleum.
Okay. And the example is?
The oil spill
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And again, that led to consequences from them, from fines and boycotts and so on. Again, Reebok, they were manufacturing in the third world, couldn't trace all of where their trainers came from, and then obviously that led to a movement against them. And a number of clothing companies have had this. So you've had with the clothing companies in their factory that if people have not behaved perhaps the highest standard of integrity in their factories, then this leads to a negative effect on them. For a shipping company, a huge amount depends on the reputation for delivery and so on. If it's felt they're not acting according to the highest possible standard, this could damage their reputation and therefore damage their income. So there is a company called Mazars, which is a specialist accountancy firm that will track corporate social responsibility in shipping firms. So they'll make sure, are they doing all this stuff? So again, this kind of opens up the world of maritime industry. Okay? Shall move again back up. This was an interesting argument, and again, it was between the various sources that I had. One of them was saying, who's responsible for whether you open fire on a pirate? The standard answer is that the master is. So the captain of a ship is responsible for all major decisions taken on board the ship, whether they go through port, whether they go through here, there. But traditionally, that has not included life or death decisions. It's not included whether you open fire or not. I'm sure you're all aware of Captain Felix, the pirate one, yes?
Yeah.
So something in his book that he was referring to was the difficulty that he was book, movie, TV celebrity. Man who was kidnapped by pirates and wrote all about it, and his crew have also come out against it, some of what he said. But he was arguing that the major difficulty was that he doesn't work in the US Navy. He's never worked in the US Navy. Not many of his men had. They chose to go to civilian ships. So the people who go into civilian ships are different from the people who go into military ships, And therefore, if you're suddenly having to take this decision, it's new and it's different, and it's not what you've trained for, and it's not what you grew up wanting to do. It's completely different. But the master is responsible for those decisions. However, the lawyer I was talking to, David Hammond, was saying that the master does retain that decision. He does retain that right. However, if, as a privately contracted armed security personnel, if you feel that your life is under threat, then you have the right to proportionate self-defense. Do we see any conflict here? Yes, between the authority of the master and your right to self-defense. One interesting point he mentioned, not on the slide, is that you have your right to self-defense, but that's for you only. So if there's another ship which is close by, if you have two ships going along, one of them is attacked, then you on the other ship cannot do something to help them. You are on your ship defending yourself, if necessary. They're on their ship defending themselves, if necessary. But the two do not work in tandem together. It's just an interesting scenario that might come up. Okay. Yeah. So I think I've run out of my slides, except for the final one, which is always the any question slide. So you've listened to me talk for a good 40 minutes patiently. Are there any questions? And I said yes. One or two.
These pirates, are they largely self-organized, or do they have larger pirate organizations?
Okay, so the pirates are coming from land, obviously, and they're part of tribal organisations. So it's generally thought that there are people organising it from land. Once people are kidnapped, then the shipping companies do contact an interlocutor who will contact the heads of tribe and so on. And space imagery is interesting for this area because you can see before the piracy largely came to a head, from 2005 onwards, it's largely undeveloped. Since piracy and ransom started to be paid, you can see a whole area of development. So you could regard piracy as a development project of sorts.
Really, how big is that development?
Again, seen from space, you just see the number of houses, the number of 4x4s and so on. But it's hard to put a number on. There's millions of pounds going into this area. Yeah.
I saw the statistics on wind and wave tides and elements. Are most of the attacks during night or day?
That has shifted over time. So there was a period of night attacks, there's a period of no night attacks, there's a period of attacks on moonlit nights, but now the advice to mariners is that at all times it could happen. Dawn and dusk is a popular time, but I think that's the haze. Any other questions?
How much are we talking usually? I mean, in the sense of a ship is attacked, and successfully so. How much does it cost the insurance?
It has costed something up to $15 million, $20 million. It is a lot of money, but it's not just for the crew, it's also for the ship.
Yeah.
Because if you are carrying, the ship itself is valuable, your cargo is valuable, the lives of the men, mainly men on ship, is valuable. So yeah, it is definitely in the millions, up to 15 million and more. Yeah.
How much, how feasible, I guess, would a much better control over the whole high-risk area be if, say, the United Nations came together and decided we'll have regular ships patrolling? Is there any cost estimates there?
The simple answer is prohibitive, because we already have these 3 task forces that are out there, 20 nations getting engaged, and we are getting more and more, more and more oversight from government, but we're still getting attacks. So I think the answer is it's just too big. So there was a discussion as to why don't you have convoys, for example, during the Second World War. We did that. But again, the answer is the volume of ships is too big. And if you're going into the sort of convoy area, then would you be waiting around for the convoy? Would you put down to harbour, at which point you suddenly cease to be a ship and you start to become a target? You don't want to be waiting around. So the answer is just go through this area as fast as possible, and then you have the naval ships patrolling as best as they can.
You mentioned that through a space picture, basically, you can see the development of certain areas because of piracy. Is there anything that this task force can do to actually attack this? Because it has to be a port, mainly. Like all these tribes have to be sea-based very, very much. So is there like an initiative or any legal basis for actually attacking, destroying the ships? Without the ships, you can't be a pirate.
Yeah.
So you go to the harbor, you destroy the harbor. It's gonna take a while for them to rebuild. find new chips, find all
Yeah.
these things.
And the simple answer is that if you do that, then you remove the legitimate shipping, which is so much the majority, which is fishing. Because the attacks that they're using against ships are largely fishing vessels. It's very difficult for anyone on these civilian ships, or indeed on the military ships, to tell who is a fisherman and who is a pirate. Generally, the presence of a ladder suggests that they are a pirate, not a fisherman. But as for the ports, if you did that, you would remove this. There are Somalis who claim that the reason you suddenly had a spike in piracy about this time, 2009, is because you started to have trawler fishing, mainly from Russia and China, going along, sucking up all the fish, and suddenly they weren't able to fish. However, this has been strongly denied by some mariners in the area who say they can still see plenty of fish, and certainly working on ships as you go along, you can see if there are fish in the area or not. If the mariners are saying this, it's heavily disputed. And obviously the Russians and Chinese don't accept it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, funny that.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, if you had an effective Coast Guard, then you could verify this for sure. But Somalia does not have an effective Coast Guard, no central government to do it.
So how many attacks are we still talking about?
So as I say, the peak was 250, and it looks like it's reducing to sort of 70s and 80s per year.
Per year.
But these statistics are always a bit retrograde, so we don't know quite how many there are this year. I think in the summer there's going to be another Oceans Beyond Piracy report, and that will be published.
When was it?
It will be in the summer, I
In
think.
the summer, okay.
So we're always looking back a bit. But again, we still retain the problem that if there aren't many attacks, then that's presumably because we're doing something about it. But at what point do we not need to do something about it, or what is the effective solution? Which is the one cause? So
What would happen if we stopped doing something about it?
Yeah, so maybe that's all suddenly come back. And it goes into a similar argument. I said the size of piracy, the size of the problems for the global economy. When we had piracy going up, we also had the global economic crisis. So if we say it costs the global economy this much, well, how much of the damage to the global economy is piracy, and how much is the global economic crisis? It's probably the global economic crisis, the bigger thing. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just can you estimate how much, in terms of revenue, these maritime companies lose due to this piracy problem?
I have, and I've written a journal article on this, and this is going to be published in the spring.
Oh, right.
For now, this is copyrighted information. And I'm not going to say it on record. Tell you after.
Right.
Okay. We've had...
Just one last question. Obviously, these big maritime vessels can function during high, sea storms, pretty much. And we have a graphic that shows that pirates attacks technically doesn't happen during either high winds or high tides. Is there an alternative that ships can not wait, because that's not the point of a shipping company, but arrange to go to that area while there's heavy winds or heavy tides?
Yeah.
So it's physically impossible for the pirates to actually reach them.
Sorry. The answer mainly goes away from the shipping companies to the people they are supplying. So if you're supplying things to the UK, then the UK companies largely operate on something called a zero inventory model. So that means that we don't have big warehouses of stuff waiting around to distribute. Stuff goes from the ships to the distributors and then straight to the shops. It happens very, 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 very rapidly. So if you're waiting around, we don't have the stores to supply our shops with stuff. So we just can't wait. This goes in an interesting way. I knew somebody working in thin air when the big Iceland volcano went off. And it's grounded all. So in thin air, you're dealing with, I think, Nokia and a variety of other mobile phone companies. Some of their essential parts are manufactured in East Asia, some in Europe. Their European factories were going, but they needed parts from East Asia, and they had the volcanic cloud, and they couldn't get the stuff, and they just ran out within a couple of hours because they needed stuff, and so they were ringing him up every single day, multiple times a day, demanding the stuff to be supplied as quickly as possible. They couldn't, obviously, because of the ice cloud, but this is zero inventory model, and this is the effect it has. You can't deal with shortages.
Just in time, it's also called.
Yes. We've had several questions from the three boys, but I'm seeing the girls here, and I would like you can have many more questions, don't worry, but I'm wondering if there are any questions from the pink side of the room. This isn't the politically correct phrase to use. Former sailor. Right, any questions from over here?
It's just a curiosity. It might be actually a stupid question, but I was wondering. You mentioned at some point about the money that the staff would get if they're kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
How does that actually work?
Well, because whilst they are in captivity, their wife and kids are not in captivity. So generally they'll be working on ships, sending money back. So it's remuneration, which is a huge source of income for some countries, such as the Philippines, for example. So if you were not to pay them whilst they're in captivity, then it would lead to significant ramifications for the family. That might affect the sailor's decision to go to sea. Because if his wife and kids are going to be less vulnerable, then he might decide not to work here, but to work on some other route. So this is a safety net for them. So the whole society is functioning around this. But there's only something like 1.5, 1.6, 1.7 million seafarers around the world. So we have a global population of, 7 billion people roughly, but only in the millions, less than 2 million people who are getting their living from being a mariner. There's a very, very small portion of the world's population. Quite dangerous in this part of the world. Yeah.
But piracy is not yet expensive enough for them to go all the way around Africa, is it?
There have been studies in this, and it's a kind of combination of the insurance, the speeds, but also the extra distance, and again the time it takes to go round. There are also different ports that you call at, so you'd have to take that into effect. So there was a move to go round Cape of Good Hope. That was the original solution, and again that also went into the pilotage fees for the Suez Canal, because they had been going up and up and up, and suddenly went down because they were losing customs to Cape of Good Hope.
Oh, fair.
Is there any report, not from the companies, but local fishermen or anyone that was attacked and there were no pirates?
And there were no pirates?
Like, for example, let's say a fishing vessel goes deep into the ocean because the catches go so that way. We have a large vessel with mercenaries, and they look like pirates, and they attack.
Yes.
Has like any local fisherman complaints about
there's simply
an unfair attack
structure, but as I say, there has been a case, and if you look at Human Rights at Sea, their website, and they will have details of problems, as I say, in the high seas, but it's sometimes a problem of finding out where it was exactly and who did this exactly. But yeah, this has been something. Human Rights at Sea is the website to go to. Yeah.
Is there any major disagreement between, say, the P5 in the Security Council or other big states on how to tackle the issue, or do they all just step back and say, well, this is international waters, everybody on the road?
There's general agreement that something has to be done, and as I say, you start to have the Chinese coming in and patrolling the high-risk area, which again is far outside, far away from China. It's not something they've done before, but it's their ships. It's their goods that are going towards Europe, and it's their revenue. So you have actually seen a high level of cooperation. Precisely how you do it, for example, the European Union, if they catch pirates, will generally try and put them in a European Union standard jail, which is quite high standard if you're Somali. But yeah, so putting them in a French jail. There has been an argument of putting them into Kenyan jails, so they would be verified by the European Union. There are some nations that are allegedly more keen to shoot them. But so this is the disagreement more.
So this would be China?
No, not China. India is the one that's been dinged. But again,
well, it's the Indian Ocean.
Yes.
Basically, so you say like if a European Union country capture a pirate, they will take them to a European jail. That means they go to a European court. So that's the standard they use. That's my question. What countries do to prosecute them?
Yes, so France had a case recently in which they had prosecuted a pirate, but I think they charged them a few hours too late. Under French law, they should have charged them earlier, so the pirates were paid compensation. So, yeah.
No,
but it was their legal
system.
system.
European state.
Yeah.
But is there any other alternative then? Can they bring them to
Kenyan jail?
Again. So Kenya, I think, has been verified on paper as being okay.
It's whoever captures the pirate has the right to trial it.
Yes.
Them, right?
Okay.
Yeah. But again, if you had a European Union, sending them to Qatar or Saudi Arabia or one of these countries, which is, Belarus, whatever, then the European Union starts to open itself up to all kinds of issues that it just doesn't. Quite happy not. Okay.
And what kind of configuration could you see us debating next week about this issue?
Whoa!
We're not limited to United Nations. That's a good thing. So we could be in a top group as well. So, but I'm quite lost at the moment.
What are the countries with the most direct
Yes.
interest in this topic?
Okay. Tempted to stop recording now. Off the top of my head, I could give you a series of issues. I'm not desperately thinking of them right now. I guess one of them would be, should there be a legal mechanism? Should we have mandatory reporting? The general consensus has been no, because it wouldn't be done. There is an argument of how should we be tracking ships coming in? They do have AIS, so they often broadcast automatic identification system data. So almost every ship at sea will do this. Just broadcast their whereabouts, what they're carrying, where they expect to go, all kinds of information. There are two reasons they do this. One of them is safety, so that you can see what the ships are, where they're going. You don't have any unexpected moves. If they suddenly turn right, you're not thinking, what are they doing? You know who they are. I have my own personal theory why they do this, which is that I've been a navigator on a ship looking at radar. It is an exceedingly boring job, but if you can see all the data from other ships, then it's actually quite interesting to go through and see what all the different people in all the different parts of the world. So I think it's to keep navigators awake. But safety is the main issue. And there is a question whether they should have it switched on or off in high-risk areas, because the pirates can presumably get this information as well. There's also VHS, which is the standard radio handsets that you're using. Pirates are using them. So how much should you be using these? I think the current recommendation is only to broadcast essential safety information about your ship and nothing more. Again, this kind of thing can be used to track the number of ships. There is no single organisation in the world which is tracking the numbers of ships in a high-risk area. So how many ships go through this area per year? Nobody knows the exact number.
Okay.
So you could have something around what should be the counter-piracy organisation for this whole high-risk area, which is clearly delineated, but it's no one state's responsibility, it's no one organisation's responsibility. So perhaps what is the organisation, how would you form it, and who should pay? Yes.
What are the countries that contribute the most to Task Force 105?
151. So the United States is obviously a pretty significant military in the region. Then we have the UK. India has a large number of ships. Even Turkey has been involved. So yeah, again, I think Spain, France, all of these nations have been involved. And we've got small nations like the Seychelles. I think they have been involved. But again, it would be the usual suspects, I think. Oh. In which case, I think we've come to a natural end.
Yeah.
Are we all happy?
Yeah.
Yes.